The NEC is often referred to as being sort of born out of simple language and simple concepts. Some people challenge that and say it's not necessarily true. One of the key things under any contract is understanding what it is you're going to deliver. Under the NEC, that's sort of embodied in the definition of provide the works. Some would say that's a very simple concept. What do you think, Ian?
Well, I think it's a yes and no to that. It is quite a simple concept. To provide the works is to do everything necessary to achieve what's required in the works information and comply with the constraints therein. But then the definition goes on to cover incidental items of work that are needed as well. And that can sort of open up a little bit wider as to what outside of what's in the works information needs to be provided, if anything. So I think it is pretty straightforward, but it relies on the works information being clear and concise over what has to be done.
John, have you seen problems around this idea of provide the works and what's inside providing the works and what's outside providing the works?
I think that people don't quite get that part of providing the works is that it says in the works information and all incidental work services and actions which this contract, not just the conditions of contract, this contract requires. And that's about what you do, or how you do it, not necessarily just the end result. So it's when I explain it, it's about operating the contract as written, not just providing the physical end bit.
I mean, it's interesting. If I sort of throw a bomb into the conversation and see how you all react, from a legal perspective, one of the few cases that's come to the court that's given us some real guidance on how the NEC works has come from the TCC, which says to provide the works does not include provision of parent company guarantees, warranties, or bonds, which, going back to, as Ian explained the definition, sound like things that are peripheral to providing the physical works. Ewan, do you think those two things sit happily together, or do they sort of pull apart?
It comes down, I think, to interpretation. Obviously respect the decision that's come out of the courts, but at a practical level you feel that no, actually this does feel that it's part of how we provide the works. And I'll probably go on and actually just to add a further comment there is that I often find employers are reluctant when the contractor has built defects. And are the defects part of providing the works? Because if it was, for example, a target cost contract and they're paying the price work done to date, they're feeling like they're paying for defective work. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting area.
I think that is interesting. Sort of going back to Ian's point about that it's a bit of yes and no. Provide the works does pick up quite a few different issues. So you've got this overarching what's in and what's out of that definition, and the case actually came out of a termination. And after termination, you don't do anything else to provide the work. So if a bond hasn't been provided before the termination, does the termination event prevent you having an obligation to do it in the future? But then Ewan's quite rightly picked up the other side of that, which is if there's a disallowance type issue arising under one of the target contracts or the cost reimbursable contracts, actually, are you providing the works at all to enable you to recover your costs? So it's quite a complicated issue, isn't it, John?
Yes, it is, and I don't think that judgment helps because it seems to go against common sense, which says to provide the works means to do the work in the works information and all incidental work services and actions which this contract requires. Well, providing a bond is part of the contract, but I can't quite see the complication is where you've terminated the contract, so you don't now have to do it. But if the contract hadn't been terminated, common sense to me dictates that they would have to do that.
Yeah, I think for me the issue is not so much the definition itself, it's its application, it's when you're using it. So to provide the works, if that's saying, well, that doesn't include bonds and warranties and guarantees to be provided, but they're then still required because they are contractual necessities, because that's what's been picked in terms of secondary options, then surely they'd still have to be provided if the contract was live. So you may say they're not providing the works, but they're part of the overall contract requirements and obligations. So who cares if they fall in that definition? They still need to be done. So for me, it's more around provide the works is around when you get into defined costs. And the point that you was making already around disallowed costs, etc., is when you're applying the term provide the works to the schedule of cost components that I see most debate comes along in terms of what are the direct costs of providing the works, what are the indirect costs, what can be claimed, what can't be claimed. And that, I think, is where the subtlety comes in and the difficulties.
So is this perhaps, John, an area where the NEC's tried to oversimplify and use a single definition in multiple different areas, and actually there creates a tension between how it actually operates?
I think I would say it's fairly simple. I don't think they've overcomplicated it. I think that people have overcomplicated it in the application of it, or lack of application of it, personally. For me, it's clear.
I think this is a really interesting discussion point, because between the four of us, I don't think we've actually reached an agreement. I think John's quite happy with provide the works is a pretty simple concept and easy to implement. I'm certainly at the other end of the scale of sort of looking at where the court is and saying, actually, that makes it very complicated. So I'd like to have an easy definition of provide the works. It's pretty fundamental. If you don't know what provide the works means, how do you price it and how do you ensure delivery? So I think all of these things lead to a real problem area and a fundamental part of the project. And I guess the way to resolve it is just to make sure that you have dealt with it at the contract stage, and so everyone understands what provide the works really means. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.